Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Caccera, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Caccera.
Welcome in. This is Joe Caccera with Real Estate Radio Live, the podcast series as we continue through the week. And just a reminder to all those as you're listening and tuning in, you can catch the podcast 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And if you want more information, always go to reradiolive.com. Also, if I could help you with any financing on a purchase, refinance, if you need any information, feedback, education on the finance area, that's what I do. Happy to help you. You could reach me a couple different ways. One is 408-838-9060, or you could always go to the website, contact me. That's reradiolive.com. Topic today is going to be how to best prepare for financing when doing both either a refinance and a purchase. So the first part of the show, we are going to do I'm going to cover how to best prepare for a refinance, and then the second part of the show, I'm going to cover how to do the same thing on a purchase. Some of them are similar, but what I'm finding still to this day, there's a lot of frustration that exists when people do financing, and even in a perfect world where everything seems to be simple and straightforward, financing has changed drastically, especially if you have not financed since 2008, 2009, excuse me, when we had the mortgage meltdown. From time to time we have people that have financed, but they have not done it since 2008, 2009 or before. And they forget now, or they haven't been through now, the scrutiny and the conservative nature in which financing is taken. Now, it takes it up to another level when you're talking about jumbo financing. Typically, if you're borrowing up to $417,000, it's really, really easy. That's what's called standard conforming. It's actually $424,000. I have to get used to these new levels in January of 2017. And then the high balance level, I think, is $636,000 and change. Anything over $636,000 is considered jumbo financing. Jumbo financing is unfortunately still more difficult, and even though it's getting a little bit better, what I try to do is really set the expectations early on up front with my clients when we're going to be doing jumbo financing. It's just more scrutiny. There's more questions. The reason why is I'll go into more detail on that when we as we roll through this. But let's first kind of go through a typical checklist if you are refinancing, and let's assume that the loan amount is less than $636,000. Let's take that one first. So if you are refinancing, the first thing you want to do is either get on the phone with someone like me or whoever you're working with, or in person, and really start taking some basic information. Some people will send you, or some people will say, go to a website, fill out some information. That's one way to do it too. Some people are uncomfortable with that still, with the security and someone putting their personal information in it. So a couple different ways to do that. First, you get started and give some basic information. That will be information like name, social security, date of birth, address, property information, how much you make. We'll discuss income, whether you make income through W-2 or you self-employed, you have a corporation, or you're sole proprietor. A lot of those basic things should be talked about initially early on a refinance or a purchase. We'll address refinances right now. So if you're borrowing less than $636,000, who's ever helping you finance really should only need the last 2 years W-2s if you are a W-2 income earner. They shouldn't need the tax returns at all if you are a W-2 income earner. Now, if you are a sole proprietor or you have a corporation or maybe you're 1099, then they will need your tax returns. We will need your tax returns. The reason why is because when you are self-employed, what happens is you're eligible to take advantage of tax benefits, and you're able to write a lot of stuff off that you cannot do as a W-2 employee. So if you are self-employed, please be prepared that we will need your tax returns. And the reason why is we see what you're writing off, and we take a look at the gross amount and the net amount of what you make after write-offs on your Schedule C and other things that are involved in the tax returns. It gets a bit complicated when you're self-employed. A lot of people forget that the wonderful part about being self-employed is that you can take some tax benefits that are not available to people that are W-2 income earners. And that's too bad, but that's the way it is. And those are great. Those are great advantages. However, it's always a wake-up call and a surprise to those that are self-employed or have companies when they go to do financing, because you look at their tax returns, in not all cases, but some cases, they're doing a great job at taking advantage of the tax benefits. But unfortunately, what that means is more often than not, it reduces the amount of income they show. See, the more advantage you take advantage of write-offs on a self-employment, you're going to reduce the income shown, of course, because you're taking advantage of tax benefits. So this is always a wake-up call. So my suggestion would be, if you're getting ready to finance and you have some time to think about it, maybe you're getting ready to purchase a home next year or the following year or a couple of years out, or I would strongly suggest you sit down with your CPA or even call someone like myself and start to discuss what income is going to be required to make this purchase or do a refinance. If you get ahead of the curve and you talk to your CPA or you discuss it with someone like me in advance, we could get an idea. For instance, you might call me and we might figure, okay, I'm going to purchase $1 million home next year. I'm going to sell my home. I'm going to put $250,000 down. I'm going to finance $750,000. And so then you and I could go through the exercise of what it's going to take to qualify for a $750,000 loan, plus taxes and insurance. And let's say we need $15,000 a month for this example for base gross income. And over the last couple of years, because of your write-offs, we're really only looking at $9,000 to $10,000 you're showing in income. Well, using those numbers, you wouldn't qualify for this anticipated purchase. So what you'd want to do is work with your CPA and take some different approaches to your write-offs, maybe show some additional income, offset, maybe pull back on the write-offs to a certain extent so that you could show the amount of income needed to make that upcoming purchase. And I hope that makes sense. This is really, again, only for people that are self-employed, 1099, corporation. It gets a little more complicated. And for the refinance, the other things we're going to ask for is we're going to need typically 2 most recent months of bank statements where you have your checking and savings, where your where our transactions take place. We're also going to look for, really, depending on what you have in your checking account, if you borrow less than right at $636,000 or less, we're really not much reserve requirements, very minimal. Probably really don't need to ask you for any reserves, if very little, if you're borrowing $636,000 or less. So the reserve requirements are minimal. The other thing we will ask for is a copy of your driver's license, and then we're going to get your authorization to pull credit. And the reason we're going to need to do that, and the reason we do need to get authorization, is because that's the legal way to do it. And then secondly, we're going to need to pull your credit and take a look at a couple different things. What kind of liabilities do you have, and what your credit scores are? As most of you know, credit scores dictate a big part of what kind of financing you'll be available to acquire, and credit scores play a big part into that. So we're going to take basic information over the phone or in person. The things that we're going to require are W-2s for the last 2 years, bank statements for the last couple of months, minimal assets, driver's license. We also will request or ask for your most recent mortgage statement, and maybe the information on your taxes, what you're paying for property taxes, a copy of your driver's license. And that's pretty much it for a basic refinance if you're $636,000 or less. Again, remember, if you're borrowing over $636,000, you enter into the criteria of being jumbo financing. If it is jumbo financing and you're doing a refinance, we will need your tax returns. If your tax returns are involved and you have K-1s and you have partnerships or different corporations and different things involved with tax returns, be prepared. We will need to get all those schedules because they all have an effect on the refinance. So those are the things we will need on a refinance. Basic, a lot of the same stuff I talk about in the second part of this podcast. We're going to talk about things you need as a purchase. They're a little bit different. A lot of them are the same, but they're a little bit different, and we're going to go through those as well. Be prepared also on a refinance as it is on a purchase, especially on jumbo. You'd be surprised. I think the biggest thing that frustrates people is they want to know where deposits are coming from and what they are and where they're coming from. For instance, if you get an auto deposit every 2 weeks of, let's say, $6,000 or $7,000 for your paycheck, we see that. That's trackable. That's routine. That's a trend that goes on. But if from time to time they see a deposit come in for $4,000 or $5,000 or $20,000, they're always going to want to know what the investor, always going to want to know where is that coming from and explain. This is probably the biggest piece that frustrates people is they're like, why in the world do you need to know about a $5,000 deposit that someone was paying me back, or maybe you got as a gift? Well, they just need an explanation. I know it's funny. It sounds like a bit of an intrusive, on privacy, but unfortunately, that came into play when in 2000, really when a lot of the compliance changed for laundering of money and the Terrorist Act. I'm trying to think what act that was as part of the Dodd-Frank, and that they want to track funds and where they're going from time to time, and that's what the tracking of deposits for. All right, that's kind of a wrap-up and review of the refinance, the things that you need. We're going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'm going to dive into what is it that you need specifically for a purchase. Be back to do that in just a minute.
For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com.
Hi, this is Joe Kuchera of Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We are your go-to resource for all aspects of real estate, including buying, selling, refinancing, building, and legal and tax advice, and much more. You can subscribe to Real Estate Radio Live podcast on iTunes and Stitcher to listen to an engaging discussion about anything and everything real estate. So make sure you get our app, RE Radio Live, in the iTunes store to follow the show.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's topic or guests, just visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Live, Joe Kuchera.
Welcome back in. This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live, the podcast series. As we continue this show, the topic today is how to best prepare for financing when doing either a refinance or a purchase. The first part of the podcast, if you happen to miss it and go back, is I dealt with and covered all the different things you need to know and prepare for a refinance. Now, going to dive in and cover all the things, kind of a checklist of what you need for a purchase. Now, a lot of them are the same in the documentation that you need, but some of the items are different, and we're going to cover those as well. So let's dive into the things that you need for a purchase. Similar to a refinance, in order to get the pre-approval started, I'll mention this right out of the gate here. The one thing that a lot of people fail to do in a proper way is get officially pre-approved, underwritten, and prepared to make a purchase. A lot of people will get on the phone with their person doing their financing, and they'll say, what can I afford? And you run a couple of quick numbers. You don't pull any credit. You don't look at assets or income. And someone says, oh, yeah, no problem. You could afford $1 million home. And then some people run out, grab the realtor, and start looking for a place. Big mistake. What I can't stress enough with the complexity of financing, especially jumbo financing, how complicated it is these days, and how much scrutiny and conservative nature that it is. Make sure you are pre-approved. These are the words you need to remember. Pre-approved, not pre-qualified. Okay? If someone says you're pre-qualified, that's not enough. That's not going to fly. Pre-qualified means you've taken some basic information. You have kind of a summary of what someone does. You probably didn't pull credit. You probably haven't looked at assets or income. Not good. If you're serious about buying a place, or you really need to get officially pre-approved. You might say, well, what does that mean? Here's the way official pre-approval goes. We collect all the documents, and what I mean by that, similar to refinance, depending on how much you're borrowing, we're going to ask for W-2s the last 2 years, bank statements, tax returns if it's jumbo, or if you're self-employed or corporation, or it's a little more complicated. We're going to ask for proof of funds, where the where the down payment's coming from. If you're putting $200,000 down on a $1 million purchase, we're going to want to know, the investor, whoever you're working with, want to know where that $200,000 is coming from. Is it coming from the sale of another home? Is it maybe a 1031 exchange? Is it coming from your savings? Is part of it or all of it coming from a gift? Is it equity gift? Is it all? There's all kinds of ways in which that down payment could come. So we're going to need to know where that down payment's coming from, and it's got to be trackable. That's another thing. So if someone's giving you a gift and you say, my parents are giving me a $100,000 gift, we say, great, but we need proof of that. Well, what kind of proof do you need? Well, there's a gift letter that you complete, you and your parents would complete, and it shows $100,000 going from, let's say, for example, from Wells Fargo to your parents' Wells Fargo account to your account with the Bank of America. Those are trackable assets. Those are documents. Those are paper trails that we will need. So really important on a purchase that all this stuff is done in advance. So we would collect the documentation. We would pull credit, look at your income, give it to a qualified underwriter. And this is the piece that a lot of people don't get to. A lot of times they'll give the documentation to their loan officer or their lender, and it just sits on the desk, or someone takes a look at it, and they even pull credit. But here's the mistake that's made, and please don't, hopefully you won't get caught in this net. Always ask your loan officer, the person you work with, am I underwritten approval? Am I approved with an underwritten approval? There's a difference. If I collect all your documents and I sit down with my processor or my assistant and we look at your stuff and we say, gosh, this is great, we could finance, no problem. Okay, let's get them a pre-approval letter. It could be true that there's some truth to that. If you've been doing this business and you've been doing this job long enough, you have a pretty good idea of what person could qualify for by looking at documents. But it still doesn't fly. The step that we need to make, if someone gave me all those documentations, I would sit down with my assistant and we would go through it. We would package it together. We would put together what's called a credit package. We would then electronically submit it to our underwriting team. And then our underwriting team, depending on how busy they were, would take somewhere between 24 hours quickly. They could do it in less than 24 hours, or sometimes 2 or 3 days, depending on the priority or the urgency of the underwrite. If someone's about ready to put an offer on a house, obviously we're going to put a request in to get a quick underwrite and something that's expedited. When the underwriter looks at it, they go through what's called a preliminary credit approval. Obviously, there's no property address yet, so they can't underwrite the property, but so they'll underwrite the file. That means they'll review your credit, your income, your assets. They'll look at liabilities. They'll look at everything, and they'll come back with a decision. And typically, they'll come back and they'll say approved, status approved, and then they'll have a list of conditions. And a lot of those lists of conditions, one of the things will always show up is the conditions are subject to an appraisal on the property. The property is, you could finance the property. There's no strange things going on. So there's always conditions in there if you haven't found a property yet. That is called an underwritten approval. And so when you are out looking for a home, be sure that when your real estate agent says, are you approved? And you go back to your lender and you ask he or she, and she says or he says, yeah, don't worry about it, we have all your documentation, say, no, I need to know, are we underwritten approved? And if they say, oh, don't worry about that, we really don't need to do that, keep pushing, push back. Don't make the mistake. And I'll tell you why. As good as a lot of us are at what we do, it's different when you get those documents in front of an underwriter that does this for a living, and they could find things that we may not be able to find. So really, really big, important piece to purchase financing. Make sure you get a pre-approval and it's an underwritten approval. Okay? So the documents are pretty much the same as I suggested. You're going to have to collect those. The difference are going to be with a purchase, we're going to have to, again, source the funds. Where are the funds coming from? A down payment. We're also going to need a purchase contract. Once you get into contract with a real estate agent, what they do is they'll send over a copy of the ratified contract with signatures from the buyer, the seller, the real estate agents playing part in the transaction, and that's called a executed contract. That contract comes over to us. That allows us as the lender to then go ahead and order the appraisal. We cannot order the appraisal and start the process of financing your purchase until we get that purchase contract. And let me take a minute just to cover that. A lot of times, real estate transactions, especially in the Bay Area, they want to close in 30 days or less. Well, if everything goes right and everybody's playing their part and working together, 30 days or less is fine. 30 days is pretty typical. If you start getting into 14 to 20 days, it becomes a little more challenging, but it can be done. This is why it's really critical when a person gets in the contract to get that contract over to us, the lender, as soon as possible. Too often, here's what happens sometimes. Someone will put in an offer, and maybe it'll get accepted on a Thursday late or Friday sometime, and people are busy, and then the weekend hits, and Monday comes around. By the time they get in the office and get it to us, we get the contract maybe 4 or 5 o'clock on Monday afternoon, 4 days, technically 3 to 4 days after they got in the contract. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it can become a big deal. The reason why is when you get into contract, there are typically finance and appraisal contingencies. Typically, those could be anywhere from 7 to 15 days, which means you, the buyer, has 7 to 15 days to prove in writing and sign off that you have your financing in place and the property appraisal has come in and you're happy with it and everything's good to go. So if you have a 7 to 10 day contingency period, and you've already lost 3 or 4 days right out of the gate, you can see how it puts you in a real tough spot as a lender and as a borrower to be very uncomfortable with the fact that now you only have 5 or 6 or 7 days to get this done. And remember, here's the part that people forget when they get in the contract. They think, well, 15 days, that's great. But remember, weekends don't count and holidays don't count. So you're really only looking at, you could be looking at 8 to 10 business days to really get that done. Most of the time, unless someone has to for some reason, weekends do not count, holidays do not count. So always account for those days when getting into contract for sure. So we get the contract, hopefully we get it as quickly as possible. What we do, our job is to review that contract in very much in detail, make sure there's nothing missing, make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to concern the investor. Like, let's say they show termite damage somewhere, or let's show they need, anything like that are red flags. So you really have to be careful our job is to look at that contract very thoroughly, go through it with a fine-tooth comb before it gets sent in. So you're pre-approved, you're credit approved, you're underwritten approved. So we get the contract. We now take that with any other conditions. We submit it to the underwriter. We order the appraisal. I would always order the appraisal on a rush. You get that started, and hopefully you get the appraisal back in, a couple days, and you move along and get your purchase underway. That is pretty much the guidelines, the steps in a purchase. There's a couple more details, but I would encourage you real quickly before we finish up the show here, make sure you are credit underwritten approved. That's the big thing before we leave. And make sure you communicate with your realtor and the person doing your financing, and that you have the appropriate amount of time to close escrow and get your financing contingencies and all those items taken care of. Make sure you do those things as we duck out today. Remember, any more information, if you want to reach me, reradiolive.com. Until the next time, thank you and take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit reradiolive.com. That's reradiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at reradiolive.com.